Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 502. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. All right, everyone, I'm very excited to announce that the Trauma Therapist newsletter has finally launched. Yesterday, I sent it out to all the new subscribers, and if you're interested, you can check it out by going to the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. My goal here is to make this the go-to online resource for therapists of all kinds interested in learning about trauma and keeping up to date. Each month, we'll be looking at different modalities and conferences and events that are coming up, books and articles that are amazing, and also ones that are about to be published, workshops that are coming up. Each month, we're going to spotlight a seasoned therapist. This month, I'll just give you a little sneak peek. We're looking at spotlighting Lisa Ferenz, the amazing and inspiring Lisa Ferenz. What else? I'll even be doing a behind the scenes on what it takes to keep the podcast up and running and the newsletter up and running and the workshops up and running. Once again, if you're interested, check it out at the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com. All right. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Luke Worsfold. Luke, welcome.
Thanks very much, Guy, for having me on the podcast.
All right, man. So Luke is the founder of Lisa Inside Addiction. Luke grew up with a drug-addicted mother who died when he was 10 years old. Every day, he says, he emotionally ran from the trauma, ripping out everything that connected his heart to his head and burying any feelings deep in the valley of his soul, never to be found again. Till one day, he says, he hit rock bottom when he realized he was a drug addict heading towards death, just like his mother. In that moment, he says, he made a commitment to become the best version of himself and lead others by example. I'm sure there's a lot of details that aren't told in that, and a journey of struggle and determination also. But before we get into that, once again, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, no, excellent. It's been a pleasure to kind of be here with you in here and now.
All right, man. So just before we get started, Luke, where are you from originally and where are you calling from now?
So I'm from just outside London in a town called Southend, just by the sea. And that's where I am now, although I have been at different places around the world at different times. Okay. I'm also in the same place that I grew up in the here and now.
Cool. All right, so let's get into it, man. So we'll fill in the blanks. I don't say what happened, but how the heck did all this start for you?
Yeah, so I'll give you a bit of context and the extended version of the story. So one of the pivotal moments I remember was sitting on a wooden bench around the corner from the place where I lived at the time. And that's where I used to go to drink and use drugs. And it was just a local park by my house, and I used to go there. And at that time, I didn't have any money. I was minus £16,000 in debt, and the business I was running at the time had just failed. I had a lot of clients call in, kind of stacking on my phone, trying to chase me for money and all that kind of stuff. And I was just using drugs on this bench, and I was stuck in that kind of shame.
And how old were you at this time? How old are you?
At this time, I was about 21, 22. Okay. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I remember calling through my phone, trying to find people to lend me money. And as addicts do, I'd kind of emotionally leveraged all those people I could find. And I remember just having one number left to call, and it was a person I didn't want to call because I knew the sort of advice he would give me and what he would tell me. But I didn't have any other choice, so I called everyone else. So I called up this last friend, and he spoke to me on the phone, and he was a bit further ahead in my journey. He had a successful business, but he was also in recovery. And as I was talking to him and I asked him to borrow money for drugs, he just said to me, "Luke, you're a crackhead." And although I'd never smoked crack at that time, I just realised in that moment he just pierced all my denial, and it was instantly just like, wow, I'm an addict. I never realised up until that point all the drugs and stuff I'd done, all the smoking weed every day and drinking and using coke and all that kind of stuff. It never sort of clicked. But in that moment on that park bench, it really clicked. And I realised I was an addict heading towards death, just like my mum. And I really considered, why was I here? What was going on? I was just going down this same path. You know, what was the point of life? And I didn't want to kind of die a drug addict. I didn't want to keep going that way. And that's kind of that existential milestone in a sense. But it didn't start there, because it started, I guess, before that. When I was born premature. And my mum, she did drugs while she was pregnant with me. So I was born at 26 weeks. I didn't want to kind of stick around in that environment in a sense. And when I was born, I weighed as much as a bag of sugar, which in the UK is like £1. And my head was like the size of a tennis ball. And my dad used to hold me in his hands. His hands were probably the same size as mine now. My legs would dangle down here. My little head would be up here. And I was just tiny, little baby. But I managed to kind of survive after going through an incubator and all that kind of stuff. But then from there, as I kind of grew up, my mum was drinking and she was in and out of prison and in and out of rehab. And my dad was just sort of working at the time. And I had, in terms of the family dynamics, there was 2 older brothers to begin with. And that was difficult because my mum, she was doing her own thing, drinking, using drugs, all that kind of stuff. My dad, he was always consistently there, but he was a man. He didn't really have emotions in a sense, and he was just sort of getting on with stuff, providing. And then I had my older brothers who were good, but they just kind of would get into fights a lot. And I guess the primary emotion that was allowed to be sort of shown was anger. Boys will be boys. It's okay to fight and beat each other up. But then if I cried or showed any emotion, then I'd be called names like a pussy or something like that, and they'd beat me up more. So there was that sense of, although I wasn't kind of told don't have emotions, there was that environment and that unspoken word of, if you have emotions, you'll get physical pain. And then that kind of formed my early years growing up in that chaotic environment until I was around 10. And that was the point where my mum passed away from her drinking and using drugs. It just got so bad after all the rehab attempts and all that kind of stuff. And at that time, I didn't have a very good foundation for managing my emotions, and I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. So I just internalized a lot of it. And I was very angry as a young child. I was able just to fight and let things out that way, just fighting my brothers and all that kind of stuff. And that is when I sort of ripped out everything that connected my head to my heart. I just sort of shut everything down and didn't really kind of experience any emotions from there. And that sort of led into secondary school, where I was kind of small because I was a late developer because of being premature. So it was difficult making friends and being the smallest in the group and being bullied and all that kind of stuff. And it was at that time when drugs sort of came along in my life, smoking cigarettes before school and drinking and smoking weed was when I first started school. I smoked my first joint. And then a little bit later, I had my first line of cocaine. And I just sort of got into that cycle. I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. I didn't know what emotions were. I just knew if I showed them, I'd be beaten up. And then on the other hand, there was this at school, you can drink and use drugs, which just felt better than going to school or doing anything else. And that kind of escalated throughout my teen years. And then when I left school, I then started my own business. And as the stress got more and more in my business, because things
What business did you start?
So I ran a web design and marketing company just locally in like the local town. Mm-hmm. And it went well in a sense, but I didn't realise how much of my emotional script played out in the business. For example, I was very much a people pleaser, so I wouldn't bill clients for certain things because I was seeking their approval. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to be nice, and I was like, oh, don't worry about sending that invoice, that's not a problem. And that's not necessarily a very good business acumen, to not be kind of just paying attention to the details and being nice. And I'd work way too many hours and not bill them for it because I was being kind and all that kind of stuff. And I guess even to go deeper, there was that sense of abandonment. I didn't want to lose clients. I used to say to the people around me, we don't lose clients, which is now looking back on it was to do with that abandonment, and I didn't want clients to leave the business, so I'd go above and beyond. And then on top of doing all of the drugs in the business, it was just a recipe for disaster, really, when I look back at it. But at the time, it just made sense. It was just kind of, we go above and beyond, and then after work, I do loads of drugs and to keep up. But that just was unsustainable. So the faster I'd running on the hamster wheel, the more mess it caused, the more debt we got in. Even setting boundaries with employees was non-existent, and employing people I shouldn't, not firing people I shouldn't. And it was just this snowball escalating to that point where I was sitting on that park bench after I had to move out of my nice house overlooking the sea and all that kind of stuff. And we had like big house parties doing lots of cocaine and stuff. But then I had to move out of there because the business just imploded because of all the chaos and mess. And I found myself living in a house share with lots of other people without any kind of income, lots of debt, and just doing lots of drugs on the park bench. And that's kind of where I was at that point.
Jesus, Luke. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 26.
Okay, so a relatively young guy compared to me.
Yeah,
but one of the things, first of all, that just really strikes me in this whole story is not only the tragedy of it, but your level of self-awareness at this point. I mean, you obviously have a lot of self-awareness about your own feelings and your own emotions about what was going on during this time and since. How did you develop that?
Yeah, so after that moment of sitting on that park bench, I watched a lot of stuff around kind of motivation and all that kind of stuff on YouTube. You can be better, you can do all this stuff, which I think is good. It has its place, all of this inspirational, motivational videos and stuff. But I guess I'd kind of discovered there is more to life. Having the internet, having YouTube, having those outlets, I think sometimes it can be kind of damaging to have that cognitive dissonance, but at the same time, it gave me a goal. It's like, I know I don't need to be an addict. I can recover, I can do other things. So I decided I want to become something I made up called authentic. I didn't really know what that meant, but I just thought I want to be authentic and I need to go to therapy to do that. Uh-huh. So I just booked a therapy session. I just Googled therapist and booked in and went to my first therapy session. And I kept going back and back and back. And over time, I slowly kind of, untangled the mess of my emotions. But really walking into that first therapy session, I did believe I would die from bringing up all that emotional pain. I'd never kind of had emotions, quote unquote, before that point. And suddenly I was kind of opening that war chest, if you like, to explore all of that kind of stuff. But I guess I was just committed to reaching that high level.
Yeah. You talked about being on the park bench and getting that phone call from that friend of yours who you didn't want to call. But surely, or maybe not, prior to that, had there been other people who called you out and said, "What the hell are you doing?" What was different about that phone call?
Yeah, so with, I guess, family would be the classic one. Even grandparents, stop smoking weed, stop doing drugs, stuff like that. They kind of, obviously I hid a lot of it, but they knew things weren't kind of perfect. But I guess I didn't listen to a lot of my parents at the time, and my dad and my stepmom. I didn't listen to their advice. I didn't listen to kind of whatever they said, because they were just my parents, so I rejected a lot of that. The old saying, you can't be a prophet in your own land. But that friend in particular, he ran a successful business. He had been to rehab. He had recovered from his addiction. He was that much further ahead. And I really respected him. So when he said that, I was like, okay, I just believed it. I knew he'd kind of walked that path. And he was kind of where I wanted to be. And I just knew in that moment, I was like, he's right. I am, I'm not a crackhead. I haven't done crack, but I am an addict, and it just pierced that veil and that illusion that I had, and just really sort of sunk in the gravity of the situation and how far I'd fallen.
Right. You talked about seeing a therapist and making that call and going there and feeling or wondering, how the hell am I going to talk about things or reveal these emotions? And you talked previously about that was a no-no. You don't show emotion at all. Talk about that process of seeing that therapist and actually doing that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I definitely had the limiting belief, men don't have emotions. And that was kind of modeled to me growing up. And that sense of, I used to say to my business partner, if you want a friend, get a dog. We're not friends.
Right.
I'm a ruthless businessman. And seeing it now from both sides, I used to say statements like, I'm a ruthless businessman. But then in business, I've never set boundaries and people please. So it's like such a dichotomy. But I really had that belief. And I guess the question was, how do I get over that? And one of the things that stuck with me is one of the videos spoke about the difference between, we have two bank accounts, a financial bank account and an emotional bank account. And we have these two bank accounts in life. And I never really thought of it like that before. And I thought, well, my financial bank account is not good, it's minus and it's completely destroyed. So I might as well take a look at my emotional bank account. So I actually saved my therapist in my calendar as my emotional bank manager. And that was just a good way for me to frame it, to think, okay, I'm going to go and see my emotional bank manager. And it's still saved to this day. My therapist, my emotional bank manager, is just kind of stuck. But yeah, I just saved it as that. And that really helped in those early days, thinking I'm not going to talk about emotions and all this kind of negative connotations I had about it. I'm just going to check in with my emotional bank manager and talk about this kind of stuff. And that helped beat that belief.
Right. So talk, or rather walk us through how things progress such that, you begin seeing this therapist or therapist, and you started this company, this addiction company.
Yeah. So how things got from there to here, again, in life, the river winds and we never necessarily can connect the dots looking forward. We can only connect them looking backwards. So it's interesting to take this look at how those dots connected. But really from that therapy room, I guess my therapist over a few years really taught me, wow, the value of therapy. I can change, I can grow. My therapist was amazing. And I put in a lot of hard work myself, but it was good to really establish this is valuable work. What she's doing was really good. And at the same time, I was building up another company at the time as I was seeing my therapist. And my stepmom actually worked at the local university, and she spoke to one of the lecturers and just booked me in for an interview to be on a counselling course. And I just got a text one day saying, you've got an interview for a counselling degree on Thursday. And I was like, what is even going on? But I was quite open-minded and I understood the value of counselling. So I was like, I'll go to the interview, even though I never really thought about university. And then when I was in the interviewer was really good. She was a really good teacher. And she said, you're going to learn about personal growth and how to grow yourself and how to help other people grow. And I was like, I already do that now. I love that. I read loads of books. I'm going to therapy. I'm doing all this kind of stuff. Why would I not do this degree? And I kind of looked at the value I could provide, the value my counsellor has given to me, and who I'd be at the end of the process of becoming a counsellor. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to kind of pull the trigger, even though it was really out of left field and not something I kind of imagined. It was kind of like a higher power moment that was a right bend in the river. But when I look back now, it was leading to the perfect place. So as I went through my degree to become a counsellor, I wanted to work in addiction. And I've always kind of been entrepreneurial for a young age. So as I finished my degree, I was like, right, I'm going to start my own company and I'm going to start working with clients in the addiction field, which is sort of where I'm at now.
Wow. Incredible. I mean, dude, you're pretty inspiring. I mean, it's obvious you're super intelligent and, being entrepreneurial from a young age and having had these experiences and taking that experience and, creating something to help other people is incredible. One of the things I'm interested in, Luke, is this situation where, again, you grew up, you had to cover your emotions, and yet when you got into therapy, you realized the value of, or the necessity of having to talk about them and look at them. What did you find when you finally sat down with this therapist, what did you begin to notice about yourself or discover or share that you hadn't previously?
Yeah. So one of my biggest things that I value about therapy is this sense of time, and I'm very grateful for my age. And that's part of the reason that I push, is because I enjoy that I'm young, and I believe I've got a lot of time on this earth, and I think that's a valuable asset. And therapy really kind of taught me that. So one example is my relationship with my stepmom, where my mum passed away and my stepmom came into my life relatively within the space of kind of like 6 months. My stepmom was very loving, she was very caring, but I rejected a lot of that love because I thought, she's not my mum. I wanted my mum to be there, but my mum was an alcoholic and she died. I didn't understand that as a 10-year-old kid. And that was like a massive sort of challenge for me, understanding that. But as I went through therapy, worked on my relationship to my mum, my relationship to myself, understanding my mum's addiction, and then working on the relationship with my stepmom, and I guess allowing that love that had always been there to come in, and realise that, you know, I didn't have one mum taken away. I was blessed with 2 mums, and I get to really enjoy that. And one moment that I really kind of enjoyed from that whole process was the first Mother's Day, when I actually got my stepmom a Mother's Day card and a gift, which was only about 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, she was over the moon. She was in tears, and, you know, so was I. It was such a joyous moment to actually write her a card and say, you know, I'm really grateful for everything you've done. I finally kind of see it now. The value that you provided, you stuck in. Me and my 2 brothers were going through a difficult time. Mm-hmm. She didn't have to kind of stick around and put up with all of our shit as kids who had been affected by that trauma. We weren't, and having all that anger, we weren't necessarily very easy to deal with, 3 boys. And I was really grateful for that. And I guess in terms of the time, I really feel like working on that stuff in therapy early on, I now have all of those years when I'm close to my stepmom, whereas if I'd have done that, you know, 20 years down the line, I would have lost all that time still harbouring that kind of block and having that wall up and not accepting that love. So I really feel like, for me, therapy allows me to sort of make those changes, have those breakthroughs, not necessarily changing the contents, but the context of how I see the world, in order to fill up my emotions and be able to accept that love and fulfillment and joy, and have all of those Mother's Days in the future where I can get her gifts and really cherish those moments.
That's an awesome story, man. Thanks for sharing that. When you began to see therapists, did you luck out with the first one you called?
Yeah, definitely. I called one therapist. I didn't really kind of look around. I didn't even know about modalities or anything like that. I was just like, Googled therapist and booked one. And yeah, it was just kind of, that was that really. And I still see her to this day. And it's just been ever since, really.
Wow. Now, what, if you can articulate this, what are some of the things, or one of the things that this therapist did that you felt, you know, worked for you, that helped you?
Yeah, so one of them definitely was that sense of kind of commitment of being there despite my ups and downs, that non-judgmentalness, and just holding that space. So in the early days, I sat there and, you know, said to her straight up, I'll never not use drugs. You're crazy. I'll always use drugs. And she didn't say, you have to stop using drugs today. You have to do this. You have to do that. She was just like, cool. And allowed me to go through that process. And in time, I stopped using drugs, and then I relapsed, and I kept going back. And just, I guess, being supported through that journey, whether I kind of quote unquote succeeded or failed, just being supported during that, and allowing me to go on my own journey of those ups and downs, keep coming back, processing my emotions. Why was I relapsing? What was going on? How to work on my people pleasing. And that was really helpful, and definitely a good, just that holding that space was really valuable to me.
In terms of the organization now, Lisa, what would you say your mission is with this?
Yeah, so my mission is to hold a light down a tunnel of darkness that so many walk. And the name of the company, Lisa, is my mum's name. So I named it kind of after her. And we go inside addiction through the podcast and with clients and that kind of stuff. So the mission is just to help clients who are stuck at that level of consciousness of addiction to help overcome that and live more fulfilling and happy lives and really kind of reach that goal that I know is possible without using drink and drugs. And I guess not losing their life to addiction as mum did, not staying stuck in that cycle and being able to, go through their addictions, heal some of their trauma and really live fulfilling lives and having the tools to be able to do that.
How have the relationships with your brothers and your father, how's that shifted or been impacted with all this?
Yeah, so I think during my journey of discovering my emotions and has been fun, but by no means me changing does not necessarily equal them changing. But our relationship is really good. We went and played golf the other day for my brother's birthday, which was really good fun. They haven't necessarily gone on such a spiritual or emotional or therapeutic journey as me. But they've definitely opened up a lot more, and my relationship with my dad has improved, and he's opened up his emotions loads, which has been good. So the journey has been good, and being able to share with them is good as well, and go through that journey. The relationship is good all in all. I guess the thing I would say is that just because I've learned to deal with my emotions doesn't mean the whole world has, in a sense. And it's not my job to sort of infer on them that they should go to therapy or do anything, or that even my trauma is the same as their trauma. We all got different age gaps, and we all may have been affected by mum's drinking and death and stuff in different ways. And it's not my job to kind of, tell them what they need to solve. And I think that was difficult in the early days when I discovered this thing called therapy. And I was like, I want everyone to do therapy. The whole world should be in therapy. And I'm still very much an advocate of therapy. I really enjoy it as a therapist. But I remember a quote one of my mentors said to me, and he said that in his early days, he would almost give someone a book, or he'd try and help them or something. It's almost like lighting a candle. And it's like you light a candle over here and give someone a book, and then you light a candle over there and give them a book, and you're trying to help everyone else. And by the time you've lit the third candle, the first one's gone out, and it just becomes really difficult. And he said the goal is to become, grow so much that everyone around you spontaneously combusts. It goes, shine so bright, all those around you spontaneously combust. And what that sort of meant to me is, rather than kind of telling everyone what they should do, try and lead by example. And they'll see, oh, wow, Luke used to do drugs and, was in that place, and now he's not. I wonder if therapy is a good idea, or I wonder if I should read this book, or they can reach out to me if they want. But it's very more, I try and lead by example. And if anyone needs help, they can be drawn into that process.
Yeah, man, I love that. I love that imagery. That's awesome. So let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Luke Worsfold, and his company is Lisa Inside Addiction. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you, Luke?
Yeah, so the best way is just go to insideaddiction.co.uk. That's the best place. Everything is on the website. They can look at the recovery programs, email me, contact me. My mobile number's on there if they want to give me a text or anything. I'm easily accessible.
Okay. So just before we go here, a lot of people who are listening to this are therapists. A lot of them have experienced trauma. What would you say to them, therapists who maybe are working with someone who is addicted, or who want to work with people who are in that situation? What would you say to them?
I would say to remember that drinking, using drugs, whatever the addiction may be, is a symptom of the underlying trauma and experiences. So it's important to focus on the addiction and give them the tools to the cognitive tools to be able to sort of process that, but also not to focus too much on the behavior and focus on the underlying stuff. Who is the person? What have they been through? Why do they use drugs or drink or do crack or heroin, whatever it may be? Why are they doing this behavior? What is their internal blueprint and roadmap? Having to think about those kind of things can be really helpful to sort of, really work with the underlying stuff that's going on, the sort of really core of who that person is.
Yeah. When you were going through this process early on, it sounds like you had have a really incredible therapist. What was that process like for you? I mean, was there a point at which, your therapist invited you to explore, why you were doing drugs, and how did you reflect on that? What was your experience like?
I guess I was kind of very aggressive about change in a sense. And I remember the first session, and it's funny to look back now, being a therapist, what it'd be like for her as me with the client. But I just kind of went in and I just verbally puked everything on the table. I was like, this is my whole life from day one to day zero. My emotional vomit, there you go, that's everything. Now looking back, having had clients do that to me, it's just interesting to see both sides. But that was good to kind of just vomit it all out and just sort of get it all out there. I've said it all now. And then over time, we sort of worked through different stuff. I guess she definitely challenged me. It just so happens that she worked at rehab and she sort of specialised in addiction. Again, complete random, or you could say a higher power moment. So she challenged me a lot with my addiction, and she challenged me a lot. But I was very I'm very vulnerable. I'm very kind of open. I speak exactly what's on my mind. But I guess my downside would be I'm not so good at change. So although I'm vulnerable and I know everything and I intellectually understand it, change is quite slow. So it would take me a while to sort of actually change the behaviour, but like maybe a session to figure out what's going on. And then into action is something that comes up a lot for me in therapy. Into action, go and do it, stop doing that, do that. And I think challenging me always is something that is really good.
Awesome. All right. So how about a go-to book recommendation before we close out here, whether trauma related or not, or addiction related or not? What would you like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so a lot of books, a couple off the top of my head that resonated with me would be Waking Up by Sam Harris. Wherever you go, there you are by Jon Kabat-Zinn is good. And The Power of Now is also good by Eckhart Tolle. Flow was another good one. And they're all quite mindfulness-based books as I think about it. But that really helped me kind of understand I'm not my thoughts. Just because I have a thought about using drugs or drinking, a thought does not equal an action or decision. I don't have to act on my thoughts. I can be an observer of my mind, and that's completely okay. So mindfulness has been a massive part of my journey, and those are definitely some books I'd recommend. And one last one to chuck in would be In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. That's just a must read for anyone thinking about addiction just that consideration.
Awesome. All right. We'll have those linked up here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. All right, Luke, man, awesome having you on here. It's a pleasure meeting you. And we'll be in touch. Have a great holiday.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks very much, Guy, for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a lovely Christmas yourself. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening.
All right, brother. Take care. All right, everyone. I'm very excited to announce that the Trauma Therapist newsletter has finally launched. Yesterday, I sent it out to all the new subscribers. And if you're interested, you can check it out by going to thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com. My goal here is to make this the go-to online resource for therapists of all kinds interested in learning about trauma and keeping up to date. Each month, we'll be looking at different modalities and conferences and events that are coming up, books and articles that are amazing, and also ones that are about to be published, workshops that are coming up. Each month, we're going to spotlight a seasoned therapist. This month, I'll just give you a little sneak peek. We're looking at spotlighting Lisa Ferenz, the amazing and inspiring Lisa Ferenz. What else? I'll even be doing a behind the scenes on what it takes to keep the podcast up and running, and the newsletter up and running, and the workshops up and running. Once again, if you're interested, check it out at thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com. That's thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com. All right.